Auditorium. Now we are going to have our second plenary today, focusing on Myanmar. You know, it's difficult for me to pronounce, and I've never been there. I'm very excited to know much more about this exciting country now. We are going to have the theme called Multi-Sector Collaboration on the Road to Nationhood. A very, very good, broad theme, but very meaningful for this country. Now, may I invite the moderator, Lara, yeah. And your guest, Dr. Ang from Yangkou University of Economics, comes to the stage. And Mimi Morvin from British Council of Myanmar, yeah. Barbara Bauer, Partnership for Change, and lastly, Cynthia Wu, Shin Kong Life Foundation. So now I turn the stage to Lara. Please start your session. Thank you, Lara.
Thank you so much, Doris. It is wonderful to be here. I'm so grateful to AVPN. There's an alternative title as well that you could consider for this panel. Emerging Myanmar, Social Entrepreneurship and High Impact Philanthropy. And the guests on this panel represent both of those things beautifully. My name is Lara Satrakian. I'm the CEO of News Deeply. And it's truly a pleasure to convene a conversation on what is one of the most dynamic countries on the planet, and one that's truly committed itself to inclusive growth and the development of the social sector. For many people in this room, Myanmar is a country we love, and we want to, For many in this room, Myanmar is a country we love, and we want to see the best for its development in the years to come. For my part, my team at News Deeply is incubating a media platform on Myanmar. We're looking at potentially bringing together donors and investors and the development community on one digital hub. So that's our that's where our study of the country began, and that's where we fell in love with the country. As some of you know, I think most of you now know, I've also just come back from having my first baby. I've just had a baby girl, so I'm now officially a working mother, and I cannot wait to take her to Myanmar when the time is right. Most importantly, we have 4 speakers here who've made a distinct, concrete, and truly inspiring contribution to Myanmar's development. And they really represent, as does the broader AVPN community, an opportunity, a gateway to engage in this country's growth in a constructive and, one could say, a guided, sort of wise way. You have their official biographies. I'll just go quickly through them. First, Professor Ong Tet, who has a long history of public service in roles at the UN and in the Myanmar government. He's been a senior economic advisor to the country's president, a member of the Myanmar Investment Commission, an advisor to Myanmar's Federation of Commerce and Industries, the national contact person for the OECD's Responsible Business Initiative, and the UN Global Compact's chair of its Myanmar network, among other roles. Barbara Bauer, one seat over, Executive Director at Partnership for Change and the CEO of Partnership for Change's work in Myanmar. She's a seasoned executive and business leader. She was inducted into the International Women in Technology Hall of Fame. And she's put that talent and all of that experience to work in supporting entrepreneurs and catalyzing economic development projects in Myanmar. Mi Myo Wen, sitting right next to her. She's the Society Programs Manager at the British Council. She works with some of the most promising and inspiring social enterprises in Myanmar, helping them on the path to sustainability through business development, organizational management, and financial planning skills. Through that work, she's truly been instrumental in building and shaping the broader social impact ecosystem in the country. And Cynthia Wu, an executive, a philanthropist, and one of the most entrepreneurial people I know, truly a creator. She's an executive both at the Shin Kong Financial Holding Company and at Shin Kong Life Foundation. She's taken a passion for healthcare and for Myanmar and fused them into projects that support entrepreneurs and medical professionals in the country. We'll start with some opening remarks, just hearing a little bit more about your personal work in the country and this sort of broader schema of what's happening in the country today. Professor, could you start by giving us your personal definition for what inclusive growth looks like in Myanmar?
Thank you so much, Laura, and thanks for having me here. And in terms of your first question, uh, I hope I can give the context first. And I think it's important that all of you here fully appreciate and understand the context of our, or I would say our new country. We, in November 8th, 2015, had what is called a political miracle. It is truly remarkable, the results, the achievements that we had. But the challenge now is how do we turn the political miracle into both an economic miracle and a social miracle. And therefore, the context of this conference, the social economy, becomes more important. How do we bridge the nexus between the social side and the economic side? Now, in terms of your question, when we started the reform process, there was a vision that all of us bought in. It is quite simple: one country, one people, one future. And in that context, there were three elements. One, we want the country to be economically vibrant. As you know, Myanmar was one of the fastest growing countries in Southeast Asia in the late 50s and the 60s. We lost that lead. So the challenge for us now is how do we regain the economic vibrancy? The second is social inclusion. This becomes very important because, as all of you know who are followers of Myanmar, you see there are still divisions, both ethnic, religious, and others. So the challenge for all of us is what I mentioned, one common future. So the question of social inclusion, and recently we invited the Queen of Netherlands, who, as you know, is the chair of the UN work on social inclusion, financial social inclusion. So when we talk about social inclusion, we must not forget financial social inclusion. Because in our country, for example, we have 5%, less than 5% of people have any access to banks. So the question is, how do we increase that access to bank? Because that will be one avenue of trying to promote social entrepreneurship. So I hope that answers you.
It answers beautifully. And there's this notion in Myanmar that you do have to pull together to become one country with one vision, with one future. So how do you move forward without leaving anybody out?
In 2015, we launched a program which is called Better Future, Better Myanmar. So what we have been doing, and we started again in 2016, the focus is on the youth, because the youth is our future. And if you look at the demographics of Myanmar, you know, we have the demographic window where the youth plays a very important part. So in the context of social entrepreneurship and also social enterprise, we are trying to promote youth. So if we can get the youth together, because the youth do not have any inherent bias. They are much open, they are globally connected, they are the millenniums. So the question for us is, how can we mobilize the young behind this social inclusive, the new transformation of Myanmar? And of course, we also have what is known as a latecomer advantage. We are latecomer in development, and therefore we can learn many lessons from other countries gathered in this room. And this is why we are here to learn from others. How can we capitalize on the lessons learned and the experience gained from other countries so that we can benefit the development of our own?
It's amazing, harnessing the values of the next generation. Could we work our way in, from Cynthia inward, on a little bit more about your organization? How does it work? What does it do? And how have you seen the social investing, the social enterprise space evolve from your work, through your work?
Just in terms of background, Shin Kong was founded in 1945 and in textiles, and today the group has 6 business sectors in real estate, financial services, healthcare, energy, and a whole array of businesses. And I actually wear 2 hats. I'm helping with the ASEAN expansion plan of the group, looking for opportunities to expand the interests in our footprint in Taiwan and in China to Southeast Asia. And I personally went to Myanmar for the first time 2 years ago with the World Economic Forum, where I met Laura, and was really struck by the similarities, actually, between Myanmar and Taiwan. Both had been under colonialization in the late 19th century, and then in the late 40s, 50s, had long periods, decades of martial law, and has opened up now to democracy. And it's primarily a Buddhist country, and Taiwan is also very much in that ilk. So there were a lot of similarities, and I felt the people were extremely warm. The land was beautiful, and what's really precious about it is that it's opening up at the same time, both economically and politically. And obviously, there's a lot of excitement involved, one can see, but also a lot of risks. And I think inclusion is obviously pivotal, whether it's social inclusion, healthcare inclusion, and so on and so forth. And when I look at examples of Taiwan, Singapore, and China, I see countries that have opened up economically first, then politically. So I think Myanmar's challenge now would be to be able to balance that in a very precarious way. And I think that's why we need a lot of people from the government, from the private sector, from the international entities to help it have a smooth transition into a prosperous society, peace and prosperous society, I would say. In my work, actually, like I said, it started about 2 years ago, and I've been to Myanmar about 20 times in the last 2 years, running around the country, seeing a lot of business prospects. But every time I went there, I was asked to go visit a hospital, any hospital. They would always ask, because we have a hospital in Taiwan called the Xingkang Hospital, and it's one of the two that did not get contaminated by SARS. So it's a non-for-profit hospital with 1,000 beds. And so everyone I meet always says, come and look at a hospital, and come and build a hospital. And so it was really from that initiation thought that I began to do a lot of research with a lot of great advice from local entrepreneurs, government officials locally, overseas NGOs, medical professionals. And we came up with a plan to basically back the primary care practice in Myanmar. And what do I mean by that? Some of the statistics, just to share with you, for example, is that under the World Health Organization, the healthy ratio of doctors to patients is 15 doctors per 10,000 people. In Myanmar, it's 6 doctors to 10,000 people. And so when we were looking as a group to say, we were asked to invest in a hospital, we thought, well, considering that there's very low infrastructure and energy, sure, we could build a beautiful building like the Hong Kong Polytech Auditorium, but what happens after that? It seemed actually that the software investment was much more in need than the hardware. So with the help of a local NGO that actually has a US partnership called GETS, Global Health Through Education, Training and Services, we got them to collaborate with the Myanmar Association of Family Medicine. So the plan is basically to to enhance the curriculum that they've got at the moment, to make family medicine a specialty, to establish the association. So now there are other groups like DFID or the Royal College of Family Medicine in the UK and so forth. They could choose the Family Medicine Association as a place to pilot and partner and work and deliver their needs and services. So that's how it began. And I think in this conference, as people are talking about impact investing, social investing, or private-public partnership, to me, they're actually sort of thin dotted lines and sort of permeable boundaries. I think everybody in any of these situations is about bringing your best resources to the table, and it's about, and philanthropy, I think, ultimately is about social investing, an investment of social capital, and it's about seeing how far and impact you can have with your investment. And it could be a financial investment, but it could also have other additional benefits.
Barbara, you've been investing yourself in Myanmar for a very long time. Can you tell us about it and the changes you've seen over the course of that experience?
Thank you. Good afternoon, and it's a pleasure to be here. Before I start answering that question, I just want to thank AVPN for giving Myanmar the stage. For the last several years, I've been coming to the conference, and I've made a total pest of myself, badgering them
It clearly worked. So now you know what to do next time.
I think Myanmar is a strategic country. It's a beautiful country. It's a country with astonishing natural resources, including its people. It's also the most complex country that I think I've experienced, and the challenges are very, very deep. I've lived there now for 3 years. I'm the executive director for Partnership for Change in Myanmar. Partnership for Change is a Norwegian organization, and it has operations in Myanmar and in Ethiopia. Our focus is on young adults and women, and if I think about all the different dimensions of inclusivity, we're really focused on economic success, but in order to achieve economic success, you have to deal with the other inclusive domains and dimensions as well. Thank you, my notes. We started our work in Myanmar in an area called Inle Lake, and it's one of the most popular tourist destinations. It's also environmentally extremely fragile. And we started with investments in vocational training. Very basic things, simple English courses, simple business courses. And we've gone on to develop business, entrepreneurship, other kinds of courses that lead to young adults getting jobs, getting better jobs, starting a business or growing a business. We also have operations in Yangon, and we are doing similar things there. We look for, in the midst of all this vocational training, the entrepreneurs or businesses that need a bit of help, a boost, capital investment, or other forms of support, and try and work with them. Our name means something. Partnership is for real. We look for partners, and we feel like we are most successful when we find vital, vibrant, successful partners in both of our major areas in Myanmar. As an example, there are a couple of other Myanmar colleagues in the audience today that I encourage to come here, and they are both partners and potential partners. So the founder, one of the founders of the Yangon Bakehouse, Kavel Dove, is here, who's now the executive director of a Canadian organization in Myanmar. And then we have our lovely colleague from Mudatar, who spoke at the investor showcase.
Would you like to stand up just to say
Yes,
hello?
that would be great. Kavel?
Just to
And you'll hear more about the Yangon Bakehouse the next time I get to talk. Yes, Nene, stand up.
Mudatar.
So, director of Mudatar. So, thank you.
You sponsored Mudatar in the investment showcase, so
We
it'll be
did.
familiar to some of you already, their story, hopefully. Mimi, you do so much, and we've talked about, just tell us about some of the entrepreneurs you work with and how you empower them and how it's gone. What has grown since you have begun cultivating the space?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you all. Before I talk about entrepreneurships, and I like to give you answering about what the British Council is, because yesterday when I was networking, people keep asking me why the British Council is here, why we are doing. British Council, it's the cultural relations organizations. We built friendly knowledge and understanding between people in the UK and the other countries that we operate in. So through our work in English, arts, education, and society. So our work in society helps citizens and institutions contribute a more inclusive, open, and prosperous world, connecting local issue to global themes ranging from social actions to diversity and, youth issue. So social enterprise is one of the four strands we work under society, and we have been engaging in the development of social enterprise sector since 2012. It was a very new concept, but it doesn't mean that we do not have social entrepreneurs. Of course we do, but people don't call the term. In Myanmar, people are always interested in philanthropic activity and the culture of giving that exists among the business community in Myanmar. Faith-based organization, foundations, and community-based organization have always been active. So social enterprise has the potential to make Myanmar globally competitive while achieving inclusive growth and poverty alleviation. That's why the British Council engaging in the social enterprise sector. But Myanmar entrepreneurs, they are very smart, they can be resourceful, but they don't have experience in building their business into scale. So we don't have strong intermediary sector as well to support social entrepreneurs to scale their impact and help them to develop and grow. So British Council launched social enterprise consultancy programs in 2014, and we are training local consultants. So these local consultants, the aim is to build social enterprise consultancy network, and who will be provide services to consultancy service to revenue generating NGO businesses and social enterprises, so that they will have the opportunity to work with the team over a period of 3 months. So they get to help address any business area identifying which could assist growth and long-term social impact. This is the work that we are doing.
What kind of businesses are you seeing on the ground?
That differences from, well, as I said, that include social enterprises or NGO who are looking at they are looking for the transition from the donor dependency model to the other income generation model, or it could be the businesses with social impact. So they came up from the different sector. It could be the arts, from the arts sector, craft shops like Pamelo, or it could be like Linkage, which is the social enterprise restaurant. So they are training underprivileged women and children for the vocational training, hospitality and catering, etc. That's very much similar to Yangon Bakehouse, but Yangon Bakehouse is in a bigger scale. And sort of like a sunflower organic dye. So they are like creating job opportunities for women working together with government weaving school. So these are the type of businesses, but they are still very small to scale. Yeah.
Barbara, I know you've worked with many businesses and, of course, your personal passion for sustainable tourism. Can you give us a few case studies?
I'm glad Mimi opened up with the names of the businesses I wanted to talk about, so thank you. For example, Sunflower Group, the entrepreneur that is leading that is the daughter of a well-known family in Myanmar, a very artistic family. She studied in Japan, studied textile design, came back, and decided to implement her knowledge of chemical-free dyeing and to encourage the natural or the native talents across Myanmar in textiles. And so she formed a social enterprise. She won a prize. The first year we did a women's entrepreneurship conference, she won the Growing Entrepreneur contest and, of course, invested her prize winnings into the Sunflower Group. And so she hires weavers who come out of government weaving schools and places them into her own weaving studio. She also provides orders to the government weaving schools, and so she is now encouraging across Myanmar a new generation of women weavers whose products are really exceptional. She does sell her products, I think, in the Tokyo airport. I haven't done a search, but I'll try to do that. But now she exports them to New York City, I heard there's an export opportunity to Paris, and of course she's selling them now in some of the major outlets in Yangon. The other organization that I wanted to talk about is the Yangon Bakehouse, and it was started by 4 founders several years ago, and it targets vulnerable women, low literacy typically, and brings them in to teach them basic cafe skills and basic baking skills. And their products are both the baked goods as well as other things you can take away. They now have a catering business. We engage with them. We first gave them a gift to buy new ovens. Ovens are expensive. Very few small restaurants in Myanmar have ovens. And if you're going to be a baking organization, you have to have expensive ovens. So we started with that gift. Then we gave them a loan so they could expand to a new cafe. And we provided some scholarships for some of the women who are coming to their twice yearly program that teaches these women how to become skilled cafe workers. We now collaborate with them on an English and kitchen curriculum, which if we can ever figure out the ASEAN standards for these things, if any of you have experts in ASEAN standards for hospitality, let me know. But this curriculum we will make available to anyone in the country who wants to introduce people to basic kitchen and English skills. And so out of that simple gift to buy a new oven, we have created, I think, a very multidimensional partnership. And we are now seeing the graduates of that program in the little cafes that are up and down the street in Yangon where we have our office and classroom space. And so last week I ordered out for a cappuccino, and the cappuccino shows up with this very delightful, smiling young woman who knew all of our trainers because they taught her English. So that's the kind of enterprise that, to Mimi's point, we are seeing small initiatives like this, but their potential for growth is quite large. So we're very optimistic. We see all the kinds of startup challenges in these ventures, and we're hard-pressed to support them adequately. And so I'm hoping that all of you in this audience will have brilliant ideas about how to help us do this going forward.
Mimi, does micro business mean necessarily microfinance or microcredit? You told me that people have wanted to make big investments in Myanmar, but sometimes the opportunity scale doesn't meet what they're looking for. How do you match funds with the needs on the ground?
Yes, mostly, for the startup and micro business, that can be include microfinance and some other business as well. So what they normally, the funding that they are looking around is for their seed capital between 50K or 100K. But that's the gap between the funding and the investor that they are looking for. The investor would look at more bigger, higher amount for that. So what I would like to, suggest to the venture philanthropy organization here through this session to look at the social enterprise sector in Myanmar, and then, if possible, invest and help them to grow in Myanmar.
Professor Tet, as an economist and as someone who has been guiding investors into Myanmar, what's been the government strategy? What's been the way that you have tried to move the needle and the economy forward?
Let me share some thoughts and try to address your question. I think in terms of the examples that are given, I think excellent examples, which is very needed. But most of them focus on the downstream work. I think what we need is upstream work. How do we make sure that the government, the policies, so when we talk about government in Myanmar now, we are talking not only of the executive branch, but the legislative and the judicial. When we talk about the government, it's not only Naypyidaw, but it's also the regional governments. So the challenge for all of us interested in social enterprise is how do we elevate it upstream? Because the downstream work, it's very sexy, but the impact is questionable. the challenge for us is how do we really go upstream? And in this instance, one of the issues that we have often overlooked, and I was there with Christian in Berlin, we in Myanmar has 64,000 cooperative societies because of our long historical socialist political background. I've always maintained that cooperatives at its heart is nothing but social enterprise. So if we can only rebrand cooperatives in Myanmar, we would have the largest social enterprise movement in the world. So the challenge is we are still very much focused on this very, downstream work. The other issue I hope I can share is in this conference we talk about philanthropy. I was told that it's AVPN. But the challenge in Myanmar is, as all of you know, we have stood first for 3 consecutive years in the World Giving Index. 2014, we were tied number 1 with USA. 15, we were number 1 alone. 16, we were But that achievement becomes a challenge because we need to go beyond philanthropy. Because many big business people in Myanmar are willing to give away money. But it is not giving away money what we're talking about. How do they do social investment? That is important. So in the context of government's work, what we have tried, and it's now for 5 years now, that any foreign investors that want to invest in Myanmar would have to do 2 things. 1 to 5% of annual net profit to corporate social responsibility. Non-negotiable. If you want to negotiate, you don't invest in Myanmar, period. That's it. The second thing is, all of them would have to enroll in the UN Global Compact. Again, non-negotiable. And we will check if they have already enrolled or applied. So in this case, and I really want to welcome the organizers, because the visit of Professor Yunus twice in Myanmar provided that impetus. And the visit of Mr. Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General of the UN, he came twice. In 2012, when he first came, we had only 15 local firms who were members of the UN Global Compact. When we came back, 2015, the numbers at 180. Currently, we have 300 plus. We are number 1 in the ASEAN countries in terms of UN Global Compact. We hope to be number 1 in the world by the end of this year. We can do it. The question is, how do we mobilize? So it is not just enough. What we have to get is the partnership. And I think this is the topic. How do we get multi-sectoral collaboration? So we need to make sure that all the 3 sectors, the public sector, the private sector, and the civil society, get behind this whole movement. Because I see social enterprise as a movement, not this small scale doing good, which is okay. But how do we get the whole society beyond this? And what we are trying also to do is to include social entrepreneurship in the MBA programs, in the postgraduate programs. Because we have to at least raise awareness. And at the Chamber of Commerce, which is the biggest business federation, we are now running a program which is called the Young Entrepreneur Movement, which includes social enterprises. So what I hope is that in the context of foreign direct investment, we have in Myanmar, the Burmese people know, we have the 3 M's, or the Matonu. First, we want investment in Myanmar to be fast, because so far, the foreign investors are still looking. They come, they look, they see, they go back. They still are very reluctant to invest, for many reasons we understand. So it's not enough to look and just to come and see what is going on. So we want fast investment. Second thing is we want vast investment. So far, what we have is $1 million here, $2 million here. The giants have not come in yet, for reasons that all of us understand. And the last is we want the right type of investment, which is social impact investment. So what we have done at the Myanmar Investment Commission is we will not accept any foreign direct investment if it damages the environment, if it doesn't meet these environmental impact assessment and social impact assessment. So there are many things that the government can do, but it has to be done in partnership with the private sector. It has to be done in partnership with the civil society. But I think the message we are trying to send is the new government, as you know, has only been in the office for 1 month and a plus. So the question for them is, you know, the learning curve is very, very steep. So their focus is primarily now on the political changes. And I think, one, it is consolidated. I think they would focus more on, because, and my final remark is this, just to follow up on what the other panelists have said. You know, other countries doing transition, like in China, they could make a choice between politics and economics. Russia made the same choice between politics and economics. In our country, we had 3 choices to make. It was peace. We have to talk about peace when we talk about social investment, because we still have many areas of conflict. And the only way we can resolve sustainable peace is to have proper business in these post-conflict areas. We cannot avoid this. Because we do not have peace, we do not have development. Because we do not have development, we do not have democracy. So the question for us, the challenge is, how do we address the 3 challenges at the same time? We don't have the luxury of other countries who can say, I go first for politics and wait for economics, or vice versa, that we go for economics. In our country, the new government has a big challenge of looking at sustainable peace, and Aung San Suu Kyi is now leading the peace process. But with peace must come democracy and must come development. And of course, with as all of us here are aware of this, we are talking about not just development, but sustainable development, including inclusive growth.
So in this time of tremendous change, the entire government changed and reset, in a way, some of the initiatives, some of the momentum, the culture of how things are being done, in a way. What has carried over, and what, in what way is it positive disruption, and in other ways, what were you able to continue that you had started under the old administration?
When people discuss Myanmar reforms, they see it oftentimes as an event. I see it as a process. It is never completed. And in many instances, people, outsiders, come to Myanmar and always focus on the change. But forget about continuity, because we would have to take things that have worked. So continuity is important. And then, of course, we have to abandon things that didn't work. The challenge for us now is, how do we cherry pick those successes? And I think the initiative is done in the past regarding responsible investment. It has been carried out. I'll be going, with the permission of the government, to OECD conference next month, early next month. We have, again, the Responsible Business Initiative. So there are many things that the current government would have to review and look at what the previous government has done. There are many things that could be abandoned. But I think the 100 days agenda of the new government, as you all of you have read, they have put a complete ban on timber logging. This is a giant step in terms of the environment. They have consolidated the ministries and ensuring that it is more robust, it is more efficient and more effective. So I think what we hope is that we would have a more lean and more efficient government, which would then run the government on very efficient basis. And in this context, again, I'm sure I hope I'm saying the right things here. When I read the title, and it says impact, as a student of management, impact cannot be achieved. So in Myanmar case too, please do not focus on the impact. Please focus only on the outcomes. That's all we can expect. Because my worry is, if there are too much expectations, impact cannot be achieved. Impact cannot be achieved in 5 years, 10 years. Outcomes can be done. So what we need is, we have to have patience and to ensure that it is not just the past 5 years. we have a legacy of past 60 years where the whole culture, the mindset is very command and control. The question of entrepreneurial, the question of risk-taking is not there. So how do we change that basic fundamental mindset to be more entrepreneurial, to be more risk-taking? This is very important. And here I rely on my young people. They are risk-takers. So they are taking risks, and they have taken risks, and therefore if we can only mobilize the youth and the young behind this, I think we would be a long way towards what we, all of us hope, which is the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals.
Cynthia and Barbara, as people who get to both observe and engage Myanmar, what are some of the misconceptions that you think abound in the broader view of Myanmar? What have you learned that surprised you and that you think needs to be corrected in a way?
I think coming from our project, actually, with the Myanmar Medical Empowerment Project, we do actually target upstream as well as downstream solutions, to answer Dr. Tet. Because I think one of the challenges, for example, is that when we're looking at an investment in Myanmar, you have to find on something that has a sparkle, that has some sort of something that you want to bet on, that you want to invest in. And given the medical conditions, as I explained, I gave examples earlier, what actually was working for Myanmar is that their medical association is 100 years old as of last year, and the family medicine practice has been going on for 60 years. So they have these positive legacies in certain ways of colonialism, of these associations being formed. But it's about building upon what you see in existence. A lot of times it's not about reinventing the wheel. I think given the network of AVPN and other association platforms, there's so much to be said about transferring innovations across borders, where you could sort of jumpstart things. And so, for example, in our case, while we were basically building and designing the family medicine curriculum for post-family medicine practices, the family medicine doctors actually were, I would say, a lot of them were more pro-Aung San Suu Kyi when we first started, but before she got elected, and had more resistance and suspicion toward the previous government. But what we asked from our partners is that we have to go and get the Ministry of Health involved. We also got, for example, the People's Health Foundation, which is the previous president's own foundation, to be involved in some medical discussions and symposiums that we held together so the family doctors could start meeting them. But what I'm trying to say is that when you're working as a foreign investor, whether it's philanthropically or for work, as a foreigner, you may not be sensitive to a lot of the political differences, and perhaps some of our partners may not have had a good experience with, government or medical institutions and so on and so forth. So you have to be sensitive to that, but at the same time, you have to negotiate with your local partner because you can't let those differences get in the way of your larger objectives. And I think that, for example, that what we demand through dialogue and collaboration and honesty in communicating with our partners, we've had lots of positive outcomes. One example is that the medical institutions, Yangon Medical School, for example, and the new elected government, they're going to start contracting work to our organization. So that would help them create additional revenue streams. So what I'm saying is that while we're building these curriculum and programs, we were still, because of our funding, asking them to support them in having more inter-segment, inter-party dialogue, for example. That's one part I think was really challenging for us.
We'd love your questions and interventions from the floor, if you'd like to come forward while we hear from Barbara.
I'd love to add to this because I think that was a wonderful example. One of the domains in which we practice this three-part partnership, we work very closely with the Ministry of Hotels and Tourism and have a collaboration that brings their focus on tourism as a way of improving economic development. It's an inclusive move for the most part because it is easily entered into by men and women, by people of all different education levels and economic levels. And so we work very closely with the Shan State Ministry of Hotels and Tourism and have formed a really wonderful and satisfying relationship with the director and now with the Shan State government to work on environmental programs that are not specifically vocational training, but they lead to improved tourism results. We work on the Inley Lake environmental issues with a quiet or quieter boat program, which leads to a slight economic incentive for the boat drivers, but again improves the overall tourism experience. And so I know that well, at least coming from the United States, one of the misconceptions about Myanmar is that it was a country where Aung San Suu Kyi was impossibly perfect, so perfect, no single human being could possibly live up to that image, and where aspects of the prior administration were not perfect. The reality is that it's a complicated country, and there is no single perfect person and no single imperfect element. And it is very rewarding to figure out how to work with all the different groups, given all their different backgrounds, and begin to pull something off. We do operate sort of downstream to Dr. Tat because we're working at the grassroots level. We did a small trash cleanup neighborhood program, handing out a lot of trash bins, but the municipality worked with us. And finally, the Restaurant Association has donated a truck to the municipality so that actually now that everybody's throwing garbage in the bins, they'll get picked up, and now we have to solve the problem of the incinerator. But it was a wonderful example of everyone pitching in, working together, and these things happen all the time. The level of entrepreneurship and innovation and ideas in Myanmar, I think, is quite striking and very exciting.
So for both you and Cynthia, the civic needs and the development needs become almost a rallying point for these diverse political and ethnic partners. So there are no questions from the audience so far, but I have extra, so don't worry. And I want to wake you up a little bit. Raise your hand if you've ever been to Myanmar. And if you ever considered investing in Myanmar. And if you have gone through with it and invested yet in Myanmar. So there are, you know, for every investment, at some point, excitement must overcome trepidation and concern. And one of those concerns is infrastructure, electricity, real estate, basic office space. How fast, Professor, can that change? How quickly can we see affordable rent for people who want to come do business in the country? How does that even work?
Let me frame it differently, because I think as an economist, everything is the law of demand and supply. If you come to Myanmar, visitors 6 years ago, you can find top hotels and pay $60. You can get rooms anytime. But if you come 2 or 3 years later to find a room at 150, it's impossible. It's a question of supply and demand. And I think the whole society is trying to provide the supply that is needed in terms of hotel services and other infrastructure. Now, we're hoping that with the lifting or the easing of the sanctions and with the new government coming into power, that the US sanctions would be more eased. Because one of the major challenges we are facing, which is included in your question, was many of the local businesses cannot do financial transactions because of these sanctions. So they have to go through Singapore. So the transaction cost is very high. But with the lifting of these sanctions by the US, and hopefully, this is why I think we have questions. in terms of the US government's position. We have done our bit, we've done our part. You know, where is theirs? Because they have achieved what is needed, what everyone has hoped in terms of political change. But in terms of the change of the sanctions, we have not seen it. So we hope that it will gradually. But let me also address one issue which is related to what we are discussing. The people talk about challenges. In Myanmar, we say there are no challenges. There are only opportunities. Because if you don't have electricity, it is an opportunity. Because you can have dinner, candlelight dinners every night, you know, which is very expensive in Hong Kong, but it's free in Myanmar. So the question is, how do we look at the issues? So if you look at it as an opportunity to be very more intimate with your better half, you don't worry about the electricity shortages. But having said this, I think we are trying our best to address but here is the balance too. And this is a political economy issue. We cannot just focus on the economic development. We have to look at the politics. For example, in terms of energy, the challenges we are facing with the dams, with the Chinese dams, you know, this is very, very difficult for us. But I also want to insist that, because oftentimes people in the social enterprise field focus too much on reducing poverty. I think it's not enough to reduce poverty. I often say, if you reduce poverty, what is the end result? People are not poor. We don't want Myanmar to be not poor. We want Myanmar to be rich. So what we need is to create wealth and not reduce poverty. Because all the emphasis has been on reducing poverty. That's what the UN says, that's what everyone keeps reminding us. But reducing poverty is not what we want. We want to create wealth. So the question of creating wealth can only come through the private sector. And here is where, you know, the private sector would be seen as the main engine of economic growth. We need to learn that lesson, because we went through 60 years of socialism, command economy, where the private sector is seen as a threat. The question is, this is why the reasons we have cronyism and all the rest of it, because we do not really have a true private sector. I came to Hong Kong on Monday. On Friday last, we had the second public listed company. We now have a stock exchange, Rangoon Stock Exchange. So the question is, how do we get the financial market and the capital market? Because this is only the engines that will drive the development and to spread wealth. So I hope that in this forum, when we talk about venture philanthropy, one of the things that the British Council organized was we brought in all the foundations, because many of the so-called cronies have huge foundations. They have a lot of money. But what they want is, how do we use that money for useful purposes? And what we are trying to do is, how do we mobilize these foundations to become venture philanthropy as per the conference? I think it can be done. The only issue is raising awareness. And I think the new government would need to really understand and appreciate what does social enterprise means, because they might not be fully aware and understand the implications of promoting social enterprise in our country.
It's so fascinating and special to have this conversation at the same AVPN summit where the policy dialogue is kicking off, and clearly so many of these questions of development and social enterprise are a policy question, and have that facilitation. Mimi, how is basic infrastructure making life harder for the social entrepreneurs? How are they getting around the lack of steady power and some of the basics they need?
Yes, it's not only for social entrepreneurs, it's for all entrepreneurs, I think. But Myanmar is fast changing, so technology has leapfrogging from 10% penetration to 50% mobile and internet penetration. So I think it's improving. Infrastructure, building, land still need to be improved. But in terms of banking sector, we have 4 state-owned bank, enterprise bank, and 22 private banks. and we have about 42 representatives from the international banking sector, and 9 of them are operating, I think. I heard, yeah. So but we have the infrastructure, but there's are still the difficulties that you need to get more patient. So you will find the experience that you cannot find in other countries, like in Hong Kong. Okay, let's say if you are trying to get $5,000 from your bank account and trying to get in local currency, you may probably need to wait at the bank for like 1 hour or an hour and a half. And you will be meeting the bank manager, and then you will filling out all these documents, and that's going to be a long procedure. But the system is still there, so I think, but still working. But the only challenge I would like to highlight here is the access to finance. So Myanmar banks, if you're the entrepreneur and if you want to start your enterprise and you need working capital, so you need to get loan from the bank, they will ask you for the collateral. That is like you need to represent your property. That could be land or that could be building. That's what you own. Not everyone's own the building or land, or maybe you own it, but it's not in your name, so that you can get the loan. That will be the one of the challenges for entrepreneur. For the social enterprises, they are more difficulty in mainstream businesses because they have lack of skills, as well as for the investment. From the investor point, to be fair, because they need more, the need to build the capacity of your potential investee, as well as the need to invest in the seed funding without you necessarily, expecting the financial return. That could be the challenge for the investor as well.
So you need very, very patient capital.
Very patient capital.
Are you seeing any early sort of creative ways around the problem, or any
creative ways? Thoughts, I would like to add, Professor, that comments for the projects with OECD. That's OECD network of foundation. They developed the guidelines for effective philanthropic engagement. I think they have tested in India and Mexico. My colleague Emily is in the audience, I think. Where is Emily? Okay, you can ask more from her. And so the aim is like bridging the gaps between the foundations and the government and the development stakeholder. So through these projects, we are hoping that we will be able to advocate to the private foundations in Myanmar instead of making donations, and they could look into the social investment. And there are some good examples from the private foundation. For example, if you come from Myanmar, you will know that Yaori Foundation, they have program with the Yangon Children's Hospital. So they work together with the government. Or Dokinji Foundation, which is founded by the lady for her late mother. So they are building a vocational school and providing vocational education from hospitality and tourism for the young people across the country. So they got some innovative approach and very good example, but still there's a lot of area that we can go by all sort of private foundations in Myanmar, whether it is set up by the crony or just the foundation itself.
So it sounds like perhaps you need this wave, this season of philanthropic grants to get the country up one step so that it can move up the next steps?
Yeah,
that's fair?
That could be the next step for the venture philanthropy.
You don't agree?
No, there's been a slight change now. As was mentioned by Mimi, we have 23 private banks. Most of the banks are now launching what is called the Sme Initiative. And most of the funds are channeled through G2G. We did have some aid money from the Japanese and the Chinese. So the question is, the interest rate is quite reasonable. So the private banks are now encouraged to lend to SMEs for their development with a more attractive interest rate, because the current interest rate is 13%, which is very high for anyone to set up a business. So the question is, we are trying to reduce it to about 4 to 5%, and it's been done. So the question now is, as these, but of course these banks are also under financial sanctions of the U.S. government. So the question is, now that these 3 state banks have been sort of unlisted, maybe there's more room for them to lend to the SMEs. Because I think the financing or lack of financing is still, but on Friday when we opened this second public listed company, I was surprised at the crowd that were there. In terms of they were willing to buy shares. So I think there is that sort of hidden supply of capital, which we need to mobilize. How do we do this properly would be a policy issue, because if you have people lining up to buy shares in the second public listed company, then it means that there are people who can invest in social enterprises. So this is where we really need to be very creative. We need to really go beyond the normal ways of thinking, and we need to come up with innovative ways of trying to mobilize the capital.
Barbara, for the businesses you work with, what are the biggest challenges they face? Is it infrastructure? Is it something else? How do they deal with them?
Well, I certainly can support all of the insights for my colleagues on the panel. Access to capital is a huge impediment. I think one of the other challenges, for example, if the banks are now allowed to make loans that are based on business performance as opposed to physical collateral, a banker in our local town said, if we're able to do that, we actually don't have the loan officers who know how to evaluate the business results in order to give the loan. So and that to me is one slice of a fairly consistent syndrome where, for example, if I look at the Sunflower Group or I look at the Yangon Bakehouse, for them to do further expansion, even though every new cafe might be profitable, they have to have a manager for that cafe. And finding that management skilled level, I think, is still a major challenge in the country. Literally, I think every business that looks to me like you would want it to expand, move elsewhere in Myanmar, move to international markets, is constrained by this lack of skilled, experienced management level capacity. We haven't addressed that yet. I'm anxious to talk more with Mimi and all my colleagues here. I think it's a huge issue that we should tackle somehow.
We'd love to hear about Muditar. Can you tell us their story, or would Muditar like to tell their story a little bit, one or the other? Yeah.
In the Shan State, as all over Myanmar, villages are struggling, many of them with the most basic levels of existence. Muditar is an exceptional organization in the Shan State that has worked with villages for 10 years, and they have a very slow and patient and sustainable model. So they work with a village on a 6-year program. They create an investment into the village that the village has to match with an investment, and with a community council that guides the implementation of that investment. They're a partner or a potential partner for us because sometimes the village wants to use that capital for a new school, and Muditar has developed expertise in building small village schools. We might have the capital for that school, but to actually have a 6-year sustained program in a village, that's beyond what we would typically do. And so I think we're an example of a partner that can support them in the school part of their village work, but they work on water, on pig farming, on life skills, so that the village after 6 years has a sustainable model. So I hope I did justice to Muditar.
They look satisfied. We have one question from the audience. If we could.
This gets to the question of governance and rule of law. So in any transitional economy, there's a lot of capacity needed. What investors are going to look for is, is a stable investment environment, rule of law, property rights. And I guess to any of you how would you compare the risks or the opportunities in Myanmar against Cambodia, Vietnam, and other countries you might be looking at? Is it riskier? Do you think there's a change happening? And what are the particular, what's the particular challenges that Myanmar has to overcome to attract more investors like yourself?
I think we're interested in Myanmar as a group because of its geographical position, being between India and China, and this huge population surplus. But I guess if you're looking from a foreign investor's perspective and our own internal research perspective, it's that, well, so does Philippines, Indonesia, population surpluses and so on and so forth. But I think Myanmar is particularly difficult because there are a lot of tenders and bids that are not run in a very transparent manner. And at the same time, sometimes certain, like with our financial group, are interested in expanding in banking and insurance, for example, or in energy. Sometimes the government will give you a specific date, maybe something will, a tender or some process or a law will be passed maybe in 3 years' time. And then the next thing you know, you'll get an email saying, next week is when this rule you've been waiting to pass 3 years and you're preparing for some changes is actually happening tomorrow. So in a way, sometimes it feels like there's a total inertia that nothing moves. And other times when the government wants to move, they can move extremely quickly as well, and sometimes even years ahead of their original plans. So I guess as a foreign investor on the corporate side, you have to set up a rep office there. You have to have someone on the ground that's local Burmese, because a lot of the materials is also not always in English. You have to be there and poised and signify to the government, whichever regime anyway, that you're ready for business. And I think a lot of the appreciation from the government is from training skills. So for example, we've been asked from our insurance business to provide some product knowledge, some insurance regulation knowledge from global practices. And we've been also asked to give presentations on how to lend money, how to do an assessment through our banks. So it's all about providing the government with knowledge and skills and expertise. So you build a gradual relationship with them, but in terms of how open it is for direct foreign investment, it's quite low. I mean, for example, in the bank, as one of the panelists mentioned, there are 9 foreign banks right now, and there's new licenses being issued. But those foreign bank licenses can only function in the special economic zones. And there are only 3 at the moment, they're big ones, and they're still being built at the moment. So these foreign banks can't really operate and compete with local banks. So we do have a banking relationship with a local bank, and what we do is we lend them money to lend to their customers, but we can't lend to Burmese customers directly. But I think but at the same time, the local partner we have is extremely cutting edge in terms of mobile banking. We just went to their mobile banking launch, and something like that would not even be seen in Taiwan. So in some ways, like I said, it's a funny place of contrast. We have our office in a place called Sectoral Tower, which many people know, sort of the one first office buildings in Myanmar. And behind the alleyways, you'll have a small office of women all in typewriters, bashing out letters. I mean, but it's just constantly filled with contrast, and I think it's filled with surprises, and you have to be flexible and patient, and sometimes you have to scramble and move faster than you expect it to be.
The future is now, but it's not evenly distributed, as they say. Professor Tet, Myanmar is not the only government in the world who faces these challenges, but these challenges are scaring people away. So how are you working on them, and what's your defense? I saw a lot of head shaking. What's your take?
I'm not here to defend, but when we go to these conferences, I was in London in the investment forum too. I was in Chennai. The same type of questions came up. How can a foreign investor? What is the climate? How can we be assured? How can we be certain? So it's very difficult for us But I want to quote de Gaulle, who said that you cannot cross the sea by staring at the water. So many foreign investors are staring at the sea, but many have already crossed. So the question, and I hope my suggestion, please just jump into the water. We will take care of you. We will take, yeah, so we will take care of. But to be quite serious, the issue is, you see, when you talk about stability and certainty, I answered the question in Chennai. Do you want the military regime back? Because they are very certain, you know, they are very reliable. But we don't want that type of government back. What we need is more open democratic government. So the question for foreign investors is, please come directly to us. And please forgive me if there are any foreign legal firms in this room. Because many foreign legal firms are opening up in Yangon, and they're making tons of money. Why? Well, you can come directly to DICA, which is the Department of Investment and Company Administration, free. You can get all the advice, and we will try to do it. We had tried, because it takes 2 months in the past to register the private company. Now it takes 2 weeks. We're trying to do it in 2 days. And I think we could do it in 2 hours with the online. So the question is, but the foreign investors are going to the foreign legal firms and paying tons of money instead of coming to us, to the responsible person. So I think the situation has changed, especially with the new government. So please have a little more trust in the government. We have the OSS, what is the one-stop service. We have all the ministries gathered under one roof. So knowing that the foreign investors, you know, wants to be sure, to be certain, we're doing our best, banging backwards. But at the end of the day, you know, all of you would have to do your risk assessment. And I think in the end, given the political changes that we are undergoing, there's still some element of risk, but I think as time proceeds, maybe in 6 months' time, things will be much, much more clearer and for the best. And I do hope that more foreign investment. There's one element which often is missing, and Cynthia talks about our strategic geographic location. People see Myanmar as a market of 51 million, but we are not 51 million. We are 600 million because we belong to AEC. We are also a market of 3 billion because right next door we have India and China. We are the hub. So the question is, foreign companies can use Myanmar not as just a location for investment, but as a regional hub. We used to be the regional hub in the 50s, and we hope that in the very near future we will regain that position.
Fascinating advice. As we must wrap up, I just want to give each of you a last word, one piece of advice for people who are looking to come into the water in Myanmar.
May I ask a question?
I am being cut off, so I'm not allowed to take your question anymore.
Okay,
but
thank you.
Please join us afterwards to.
Thank you.
We have to. Can we get more time? No. So. just final one piece of advice we gotta go. No advice. None. You could have asked a question.
The only last word I would add is thank you for your attention and for letting Myanmar become such a wonderful part of this conference, and I hope we continue it.
Mimi, any other thoughts?
Yes, I just wanted to encourage the AVPN network here. Myanmar is currently undergoing a historic process of movement in economic development and social stability. So I would like to encourage all of you to take part in the process. And then British Council in Myanmar will be there to help you if required in terms of information, or you can always get access to our local consultant. Thank you.
These exceptional panelists are truly a gateway. Please join me in thanking them for being with us.